Hey everyone, welcome to our session for today, pricing strategies for today's sellers. So I really want to take the opportunity to thank you all for joining us on this webinar series and for Greater Boston for sponsoring it. I do want to remind everyone that our webinars are being recorded, our virtual sessions are being recorded, and they're being uploaded as fast as humanly possible to the Greater Boston YouTube station. So if you are not subscribed to that YouTube station, highly recommend you subscribe and you turn on your notifications. It's a little bell, it's usually in the upper right-hand corner. When you log on to the website, just go in, everyone, and search on YouTube for Greater Boston Association of Realtors. It pops right up. It's right there. And our webinars are all being put up. So if you want to go back and watch them again, or you didn't get to see all of them, or you want to share them with someone else, please feel free to do that. We are recording all of these and we are putting them up and online. So just something I want to say kind of before we get started. I've mentioned before that many of these classes were classes that I have done over the past years of my teaching. And this is certainly one of those as well. And when I went through this presentation, mostly because I wanted to make sure I had really the most important information here, I also really struggled with shortening this down to the hour format. So I think I can cover all this in an hour, but you may see me skip over things that I try to figuring out which is the most important for you to really understand for this market that we may be approaching. And then secondly, I want to share with you that there is entirely possible that many of you on the webinar today or those listening to the recordings in the future truly have not sold in a market other than a really great market. So our market started to recover sometime in 2000 and oh gosh, we went down in 2008. We made a brief recovery in 2010, and we really started the upward climb somewhere in late 2011 to early 2012. And so from there, right up until now in 2020, we really have been in a increasing and good market. So we're really talking over 5 years, which is a long time. So if you're newer in the business, you've only seen it increasing in a really good, and for some of you on the call, like a super heated marketplace is some of the things that you have seen. So pricing strategies, albeit I would argue that they were always important, for many of you, pricing literally caught up. If you weren't doing a good job, people bid, or it eventually sort of caught up to you. That is most likely not going to be true in the future. One of the things we will most likely see happen is an adjustment on the inventory, and buyers and pricing is going to be even more critical now than it ever has before. And again, I'm not saying we'll see a down market. I don't have a crystal ball, everyone. I don't know what's going to happen once we come out of our houses, right? I don't know about you, but it almost feels like I was saying this the other night to someone. That scene in The Wizard of Oz when the lollipop kids, and they, like, you know, the little ones in the nest wake up, and the song that goes along with it. I almost feel like that may be something that is truly happening to us. I don't know what our world is going to be like when we come out of this, but it's entirely possible that this has created enough impact on our economy to affect our housing market. And therefore, I think pricing is going to be really important, because the fact of the matter is, no matter how bad our housing market has ever gotten, we have always had people who want to or need to sell their houses, and people that want to or need to buy a house. So we will still have a business to go back to, but that business is going to require potentially some new skills from that. So I do want to remind everybody that I'd love this to be interactive. So please pop up your questions down in the below in your toolbar. You should have the question mark. Again, your toolbar may be depending upon the device that you're on and how you're holding that device, but you should see a toolbar and it should have a question mark, which really kind of indicates that's where you're going to go over and ask me the questions. And again, I'll kind of pop back over to them. But and let me just move this video setting out of the way here so I can see my PowerPoint. There we go. So I took this from a really great source that I love to use often in my programs, and that's Real Estate Wiki. So it's a Wikipedia specific to real estate terms. So I do want to caution you. Remember, we have the same comment we can make about all wikis, and that they are open source resources. So people can put things in which may or may not be accurate. But I thought for the most part, this was a fairly decent explanation of a pricing study, or what we typically call CMA. And I'm actually going to just point that out first, CMA. So that C is a word that we have placed several definitions or several C explanations on. We have used comparable, comparable, and competitive. And I'm going to tell you, I have never cared for comparable, because no seller ever thinks their house is comparable with anyone else's. Comparable, I was really fine with for a long time, because you really were comparing, although I'm going to tell you, I think if no one's house matches mine, then certainly none is comparable. And the fact of the matter is, I think a key item for you to start stressing to the consumer out there is, particularly as we look at inventory and that, is what is your competition? And that is truly what your property is priced in. So, you know, what do you have as competition? So I think that makes for a really good aspect as well. So we're going to start using competition as a word from that. Now, this tells me that my competition is ranked on, and let me just highlight these for you, the solds, the failed to sell, or what we usually call expired, or those currently on the market, all right, the active listings. And what I do is look for something substantially equivalent. By the way, I love that piece of language right there, and one I always recommend people use. So there's a great substitute for any time you use comparable or comparable you want to use. Try substituting substantially equivalent. Because now I can buy into, you know, it's not like my house with, and to quote Zig Ziglar used to, the extra heavy duty nails, Mr. Wojciechowski, right? That it's substantially equivalent in location, style, and amenities. Although I'm going to argue that there's some things missing here in this definition. Anybody want to take a guess at what they think is missing from this definition? Chat it over to me. What do you think? I think there's some things missing. Actives are, what are they? They're talking about currently on the market is what they've used as active. Nobody? Do we have a winner? I think substantially equivalent is going to look potentially at some of the things as conditions. Samantha, you're my winner, right? For that. Here is the two things that I think are missing is under agreements and pending or pending under contracts, whichever word that we utilize for them. And everyone, I think this is going to be critical that we are looking at this element. Now, I think at virtually every CMA product is actually set up to pull in those categories, but for many of us, we haven't necessarily used a lot of those categories. But here's where everyone, you kind of connect the dots, right? So here's what's on the market. Here's what's sold in there. And where is the market going, right? Well, for most part, we have spent, as I have just said, years and years and years with a market that's going up, right? So there wasn't any need for me to look for any data to connect the dots. The data was telling me that over and over and over and over again, right? And I also didn't have a lot of expireds or failed to sell, but those also tell me where this active may be overpriced is the failed to sell. But the pending or under agreements, everyone, really helped me connect the dots. And I'm going to tell you that I think that's a critical element. And I will share something that my good friend Lee York shared with me yesterday on a phone call. Lee is from Fort Worth, Texas. And she is an active and selling real estate agent in the Fort Worth, Texas, besides being a national speaker and a very active volunteer in the National Association of Realtors. Lee shared with me how substantially down their pendings were in compared to last month and February of last year. So, excuse me, March of last year. So she had pulled her March data, and her March data was down from the month before, but substantially down from the year before. So their pendings are there on agreement. They were still closing. Their solds were up, right? They were still closing, but those things were all in the works, everyone, before all of this happened to us. So the pendings are going to be critical elements, not only the amount of them, but the price that they're closing in, the list to sell price ratio, et cetera, all this other data that we're going to have. So no more shortcuts, everyone. A market analysis needs to be done on a complete portion of the program, as well as we have to go on there. Oh, Larry, I'm sorry, I missed you. And so, and actually, now after I said it, a couple of people, Jeff siphoned in and Tom siphoned in. So we got a couple of people that shouted it out afterwards. But Samantha was the first that shouted it over to us from now. So how do we use this CMA? How do we price our property? Well, I've long said that many of you price property like this. It's an art, right? You say, I think it's worth because I think so. As a matter of fact, I've consistently had sellers tell me that that is your complete CMA, right? No paper, no data, no printout, no nothing but the I think it's worth, right? Process. But my question to you is, are you a great artist? Are you Michelangelo? Or are you having trouble keeping in the lines of the paint by number, right? Are you just splattering things all over the place? Or are you really looking at the data, the statistics, the numbers, and the process? And frankly, I would maintain that you're somewhere in between. There is definitively some art to pricing, and there's absolutely science to pricing. And I think we need to get really good at both of those aspects. Data is something we need to get comfortable with. And from the minute this process started and we got talking about this issue to agents and broker owners, managers, team leaders, and everyone else, myself and many of my fellow speakers have said to you, and I still maintain this is significantly important, is that you track your numbers. You have to understand the data. You have to get into the science of the pricing of property, because that's going to be a key element to your success in the future. So let's look at some of the fundamentals. And I know that everyone was taught this in license school. It's been a long time since I've taught license school, but I know that everyone learns this. As a matter of fact, I actually just completed a project in January for McKissick in writing test questions for them. So again, I know all of this stuff. I had to get out my license books and all of those things to finish writing up some test questions. So I know everyone learned these items, but whether you've used them is significantly important. So remember that there's a cost to a house. How much does it cost you to build it? And here's where Mr. Wojciechowski's extra heavy duty nails may come into a factor. What did it cost to build that house? Do you understand all of the costs and what they equate to other aspects of it? So here's a great example that I found to make you understand some of the costs. And again, whether these things will continue to hold true or not, but according to NAR's green improvements, they add 20 times their annual savings in value. And that's according to the appraisal journal, everyone. So 20 times the annual savings. And I'm going to say that it's entirely possible when you've been throwing out words like pandemic and quarantine and et cetera, that people will be looking at off the grid processes and procedures. So green may be a significant aspect. Let me share probably the funniest and most memorable situation I ever came across when an agent tried to argue the cost of something to the value of it. And let me throw up the three things so we can kind of see, and I'll come back to those aspects. But it was an agent in a classroom who was sharing with the class that they had just taken the new listing. And I could see that there was some sort of uncomfortable giggling, squirming around of people in the class. This was a close-knit area of class, so everyone in the class was familiar with this gentleman's new listing. And I said, I'm sensing that some people like want to kind of make a comment, so like, let's feel free, let's explore it, let's go look through it. And the comment was that people thought it was overpriced, right? So I looked at the listing agent in the class. I said, would you like to explain to us, what is some of the pricing? And just so you know, everyone, I'm going to really date myself because this is before buyer agency. So we had no issue with buyer agency or sharing that information from there. It was a very different world in that respect. But the agent started to explain that his pricing was affected by the recent improvements that the owner had done to the property, right? So the cost of those recent improvements, he claimed had value to them and therefore affected the price of the property. So I asked him, well, give us some examples of what those recent improvements are. And he said he added on a garage, right? And I said, okay, so he built a whole new garage structure on it. Well, no, he put up panels to enclose what was a carport. Okay, I think that's still a carport, right? It's not a garage because they're panels, right? It's not an entire structure here. So I think that it would still be viewed as a carport. And I said, what else did he do? And he said he added central heating. I said, as opposed to, he said, what do you mean? I said, it had no central heating before. He said, no. And I said, this is New England. I think a buyer expects a home in New England to have central heating. I mean, I might be going out on a limb there, but I'm pretty sure that improvement, even the cost of it, does not affect value and therefore should not affect the price of the property. So I'm pretty sure there's no additional value, everyone, in central heating. Now, again, in other parts of the country, the story might not be as quite as funny as it is here in New England. Um, to sell a property without central heating or to add it and say that it increased the value over the competition. As we start looking at what is your competition and start talking about the buyer pool, I am pretty sure they're all expecting central heat here in New England. So again, here's the relationship that we're looking for. And what we're looking for is what I like to call that sweet spot of what is the market value, right? So what's the cost of the property? Which is really a lot of what the appraisals look at. What's the price, which is basically anything that you and the seller agree to place on it. The value comes into play when I start putting in the buyer. What is the pool of buyers looking for? And the pool of buyers is looking for the market value, that kind of sweet spot. So, and by the way, that makes a great diagram to explain to a seller, because the seller tends to look at that base of the pyramid of between the cost and the price, right? And exactly what's happened. And they view the tip of the pyramid as if it's your imaginary number, particularly everyone. And again, I don't want to say anything. Maybe I should be knocking on the wood behind me here when I say this. I don't want to indicate that you're going to be talking to sellers about declining value. Again, entirely possible. Many of us on the call have been in declining marketplaces before, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But let me share with you, the very worst place you can be is chasing a market down in price. And those of us who've been in the market in the mid 2000s, 2005 to 2008, as we chased the market down, or the late 80s to early 90s as we chased the market down. I go back to both of those incidences. Those are not fun places and not places where we want the seller to be. So they need to, in essence, understand and relate to this information. Yeah, Jeff said, did it have central plumbing too? So yeah, again, Jeff, not a cost or a value. Here are some other basic appraisal terms that I want you to understand is what's the cost of substitution? In other words, if you don't get this particular property, what would it cost me, in essence, to build a piece of property? So the lack of substitution here in New England makes for a great deal of the cost of our property, right? So many of you are in communities where we're going to see very little new construction. From that process, unless we drastically change the style, the zoning, the regulations, et cetera, where we're not seeing things. When I got into the real estate industry in the late 80s, we saw 150, 300 lot subdivisions going on, and a lot of the communities were built in the world of new construction. That is not necessarily true. You're not going to replace this 1830s Greek Revival house on the left with brand new construction for many of you, unless with a very small exception. We have the one-offs. We still have some 2 and 3 lot substitutions, and we are starting to see some change in not only zoning, but the style of houses, as maybe tiny houses get more important as we go forward from that. The buyer pool is also looking for this appraisal term known as conformity, everyone, and this is a snapshot of Levittown in New York, where conformity was the ultimate situation from that. And people look for those things, and conformity actually comes in not only the trends of the nation, so to speak, but they also come in some great sort of local aspects. And I can always remember years ago working with a builder who pointed out this conformity that New England buyers were looking for that I'd never realized, but he was making that change on a regular basis. So he became aware of it really quickly. The New Englanders, although frankly, it kind of makes sense to me, to have this, don't actually care for what are known as front-loaded garages. So that's what you actually see on these houses on the left. So standing by the woman and the child right there, right, you're noticing she's standing right in front of the front load garage of the house next door to her. So those front load garages, New Englanders like side load garages, which frankly I think makes plowing snow and et cetera a little bit harder. But it is one aspect of the curb appeal. Whereas frankly, if you go out to higher density building areas, a lot of places in California and et cetera, you would find those houses with the garage right up to the front and actually very little front lot line from that. And the garage is right up there, and the houses are turned to the back and oriented towards the back of the property. You'll also notice, everyone, that there's some conformity in this picture that is a trend. So you'll notice that these houses have big bay or bow windows. I actually think that's a bow window. It's hard to tell. Could be just a picture window, but any case, bay, bow, or picture, not necessarily something people are looking for. As a matter of fact, they don't usually care for those now, and it kind of dates the aspect of it. So what's the conformity? What are people looking for? Obviously, as I get into the city, we have an entirely different set of conformities as I'm dealing with urban neighborhoods and different types of structures, et cetera, from there. So Larry grew up in Larry, did the house, do we have a good, is this a snapshot like of what yours looked like, or were they other, because there were many styles in Levittown. This was just happened to be one. And I think this is New Jersey, if I recall, where I snapped the picture from there. So yeah. And by the way, that has a lot of aspects to some of the building structure going on in other places from that aspect. Contribution, everyone, is the point where the number of items you have in a property increases the value to a point where it no longer increases, in some cases decreases. In this particular case, I've used bedrooms. So a house that has 2 bedrooms over 1 is obviously worth more. A house that has 3 bedrooms over 2 is worth more. For most of your marketplaces, 4 is also worth more than a 3-bedroom house. Here's where the point starts to change, and it depends upon exactly where you are in your marketplace. So for most of us here in New England, a 5-bedroom house doesn't necessarily have more value to it. Certainly a 6 or a 7 bedroom house doesn't have necessarily any more value. In many cases, when you start counting above 5, you're talking about some of our older Victorian houses or that, which have 3rd floor bedrooms that were originally built out as the helps, servants, whatever, quarters that we've utilized that aren't in the same quality or condition or et cetera as other bedrooms. And frankly, we don't necessarily have a need for them. So without the need for those bedrooms or the desire or the quality condition that many of you mentioned before, they actually have diminishing value, right? So it's important for us to realize that at some point in time, a 3, 4, or 5 bedroom, again, I don't know which is necessarily appropriate in your market, may be equal because it's at the top of the list. That may be true about 6 or 7, but 6 or 7 might actually be of diminishing value. So that's the value of contribution as we have identified it from that aspect there. And yet, price range will absolutely have an effect. So if you're in, as Steve said, the luxury market will have potentially larger homes with more bedrooms, guest rooms, auxiliary housing, guest houses and things like that. So again, these are all really local and really individualized. But so what I want everyone to understand is the concept, and the concept that they apply it to their local marketplace. And Steve also mentioned that the same could be true about bathrooms. So for many of us, bathrooms start to have diminishing value after 3 or so. For others, they're expecting as many bathrooms as bedrooms. They were expecting more bedrooms than the average. So again, contribution has a different set of numbers to it, to each local marketplace to where you're going. Next, everyone up, I want you to understand the statistics or the numbers. And again, I have started with condition, which many of you have said is exactly what you are also looking for as well. So here are some of the numbers that I think you need to be watching and understanding. So number one up, I want to talk about days on the market, everyone. And days on the market should not only be watched closely, but we should always be trending our numbers. So trending our numbers means that we're not looking at what it is today versus what it was yesterday, what it is this month versus last month. But as you heard me make mention of, Lee compared it to last year as well, which is a classic concept. Trending should take somewhere between, I like 16 months, everyone, for us here in New England, because there is a natural swoop to our real estate industry or seasonality. But here in New England, we typically are, spring, summer, fall, winter. All right. So that up and down aspect to it. But the seasonality isn't date related. For many of us, it depends upon, do we enter spring by snow or et cetera? Obviously, this time we have had a huge change to where our spring market would be. So the seasonality of 16 months lets me kind of shift that adjustment or see that swoop change from that. And in a minute, I'll show you a platform that can track some of these things. I also believe that no one can hear what you say, particularly when it comes to numbers, until they can see it. So using platforms that graph these numbers are really significant. That's where you really get to see they're stable, they're declining, or they're inclining, even with the seasonality. You will see that swoop go upwards or downwards as that aspect. So what's the days on the market? Again, if inventory rises and buyer pool goes down, our days on the market will go up. Now, list to sale price ratio is one that I love if it's done correctly. And I think to do it correctly, you need to use original list to sale price ratio, because frankly, if you use what the MLS will typically give you, and that is last list price to sale, it does not matter what the market is. We will generally come out around 97 to 100%. And that 100% is actually fairly recent. We used to be fairly steady around 97. But frankly, since our market here in our local area has been inclining, so many of us have been closer to that 100% on average. You do original list price and you follow the pricing drops down, then that gives you some real indicators. And I'm going to highly suggest and strongly recommend you either adjust your trending platform to utilize that if that's possible for you, or that you hand calculate many of those things so you can understand where is property really selling at compared to when it was listed for, and how long ago was it listed, the days on the market. Where are we going with average sale price? And again, here's one statistic you're going to hear a lot of reporting on, because frankly, I think we'll probably see a drop in inventory as well as a drop in the buyer pool, which means that the sale price may not drop as much as it may in other aspects. So I think we'll see some sale price stability, which means that will be good news and people will like to report that, for instance. And here's my favorite, everyone, is what is your competition truly doing out there, which is inventory or absorption rate. And I think that's really important. It's our only future looking statistic that we have is, on average, how long is it going to take to sell off this inventory or this pricing product? And in order to get these numbers, everyone, here's one of my favorite platforms that everyone has the availability to get. So I took this snapshot yesterday, everyone, and you'll notice that you actually can get your own zip code. So you can see the Centerville marketplace, which many of you know I'm actually in Centerville, down on Cape Cod. So when I logged on and went to pull a report, because they don't have the service, it doesn't allow me to do anything else. But so for those of you who want to get on, you can see this. By the way, there are other platforms out there. I happen to be a big fan as well of Trend Graphics, but previously, and I don't know if this is still true, previously Trend Graphics had limited the competition in areas. So they like to sell their products to people, a single player in a marketplace from that. So Trend Graphics may not be available to everyone. You can certainly see. RPR has some wonderful graphs and trending platforms as well that many of you utilize. And RPR, remember, is free for you to get on and notify. But you can see, this is just one of the small graphs. I'm going to actually jump over here to the website so you can go over here to market reports. So you can see on the market report, everyone, here's a little chart that I pulled, but you can see that there'll be explanations as well as this other really interesting graphic that comes on, and which is kind of this, dial, where are you, good, bad, or indifferent, buyer or seller market, lengthening days, or et cetera. So I love those combinations of the two trends as well. And I was looking for, I've forgotten, Altos calls inventory something completely different. I don't know if I have anyone on the call who uses Altos. If you can remind me, let me see, is it on this report? Yeah, I'm not positive, but they do use a different term for inventory rate that would be up there from that. Yeah, and again, Steve, is a wonderful comment as well, which says it's not just locale, it's price ranges as well. So again, and I'm going to talk about the buyer pool in a minute. If I were running this report, so Steve is going to list his house with me. I think that's a $10 million house, isn't it, Steve? I got to make this worth my while, everyone. So I'm not going to do the report for Sherburne, all right, for Steve's $10 million house. I'm going to do the report for Sherburne houses with the same criteria that he has, which are, I don't know, 9 to 12 million from that aspect. So again, and that's how I would be pulling this report specifically for his use. That said, I'm going to pull the report for Sherburne on a regular basis, the entire town of Sherburne, and I'm going to be looking at what is the trending, which is going to include, I don't know, 500, is there 500,000 in Sherburne? I'm not even sure there is, but it's going to include the entire marketplace. So I'm going to have my pulse on the sort of meter of what the entire town is doing, but I'm going to isolate the data specific to you and your marketplace, your criteria, which will include price range as well, not just locale. So that's an excellent aspect. So this is, again, Altos Research, everyone. You can check it out. And again, I love how they take all this really important data, they trend it and compare it. Again, they graph it so people can understand how you utilize it. By the way, please note, everyone, on this one, in my market report that I pulled, or this little mini version of it that I pulled, they also use something that I find New Englanders are not good at using, but it is sometimes more applicable than you think it is price per square foot. So before you tell me it doesn't work because you have such varied properties in your market, I think you should be tracking it and showing me that it doesn't work. So I know that it's not doubt. There is no doubt in other places. I think we were looking at Dallas, Texas on the site, and there's clearly subdivisions miles upon miles big with the exact same, one-story ranch, et cetera, where cost per square foot is without a doubt how real estate agents calculate values of property. That is not true here in Massachusetts. However, there are places and there are property types or there are price ranges where it does work. I like to see it calculating it, everyone, and then being able to explain to me or the seller, et cetera, why it may or may not work. By the way, if your buyer is coming from Dallas, they're going to be looking for that information as well. There is a market report that MAR does as well, but again, it's more generalized. So MAR does the reports by areas or counties and et cetera, as well as MLS PIN does an economic report, the market economic watch. I think it's what it's called, everyone. And it's done by town, it's done by zip code, which I love because some of you obviously are multi-zip code towns, and it has some trending or graphing to it as well. So look and see what it works best for you. Clearly, don't go out and buy something. I'm not proposing that before you utilize what it is that you particularly need. And again, I will say to you, what I need is my market area down to potentially something like the zip code, and then to be able to source it out for a particular seller, price range, et cetera, from there. You can utilize that information as well. All right. So why do I do all this? Why am I going to go through all this work, everyone? Well, you know, one of the things is that you're developing a range of value, right? So you understand what the buyer pool is, how you're going to negotiate that. And again, you know, we have been negotiating upwards for so long that I think people, and again, you know, everyone, many of you have sat in the class with me that I teach the real estate negotiating expert class. And when we have an exercise in there, which is negotiating downward, and people have a hard time grasping that because they just don't see that happen. You might be helping sellers negotiate downward in sales price, not upwards. And so having that range of value is really important. By the way, in updating that range of value as well, remember, my competition is changing fairly rapidly out there. Someone sells, someone comes off the market, someone decreases their price. That completely changes my competition. And remember that when people decline price, I have two effects on my range of value. When the house that was substantially equivalent, see, I love that word, when they were substantially equivalent, when it decreases the value of my house. But when a house that was better than mine, all right, decreases its price down to my current price, it also declines my value, right? So what my competition is doing affects my range of value, which will affect my negotiating strategy, all right? It also may affect some of the financial alternatives. And guys, there's no one who hates putting these things back up on the screen. I thought, I said, if I can manage to finish my real estate career without ever seeing these words of short sales and mortgage workouts, again, I would have been a happy woman, but unfortunately, it is entirely possible, right? It is entirely possible. You know that we have had numbers that have exceeded the depression in out of work, unemployed Americans. And please remember, everyone, when they're quoting unemployment numbers, they are never counting people that, and again, this will change because of how we're changing unemployment this time around, or we're hoping that it changes. But unemployment numbers never counted people like us, all right, 1099s. It never counted independent contract worker statuses. So because they weren't eligible for unemployment. So many of those people are also out of work, and those numbers are going to affect the financing of property short sales, foreclosures, et cetera, mortgage workouts. And those are going to be really important for you to understand that some of what you're going to be doing in the past is what we did in the 1990s and what we did in 2006 and 7 and 8 was not to help a seller sell, but help a seller do a financing options. And that was part of our work as well that we needed to understand. So those things are important as we get through. The purpose of doing a market analysis gets me in the door, everyone, gets me in front of a seller, because that seller may be thinking, depending upon what his property is worth. I read this online, everyone, the other day, and I think it was completely unrelated. The interview with this particular agent was done several months ago. And it was really, it was actually the line the agent had come up with was based on losing a sale of an investor he had been working with, right? But here's what you should be thinking about. Here's what you should be talking about. Here's what you should be asking. You should be asking sellers, at what price would be so astronomically fabulous that you would consider moving, right? Because I think you have a lot of people who are going to say, I'd love to sell, but I can't sell in this marketplace. Well, I don't know that unless you tell me what that price is that you need to sell at. And I think that's what you should be reaching out to all of your past sellers, all of your past buyers, everyone who's sitting in a house. Please let me know, what do you think is the deal that would make you move? Because if I have it, if inventory gets really low and the buyer pool's still out there, let me know what I can reach out to you with. All right. And again, I think it's early to start saying that right now, but that's something I think we need to start saying, and we need to start being the professional that shows that. And that builds trust and confidence with you. All right. Is here you are, you're looking out for my best interest. I also think this actual document, right? All this data, this collection, it serves as your script in how you're explaining these things to sellers. There isn't anything you missed if everything's in front of you in this document. And by the way, certainly for the very near future, you're going to be producing this and doing a consultation just like you and I are right now. Now, I'm using GoToWebinar, which no one's going to probably use, but you've heard me talk about it before. Zoom, you've heard everybody talking about it, right? There's a free version of Zoom, which means that your seller gets on his computer, you share your screen just like I'm sharing my presentations in PowerPoint. Your CMA might be in PowerPoint or Flipbooks or any number of other applications, and you're literally going through it. I got my camera on, so we're talking. You're going to have your camera on, and I'm going to understand. You're muted right now, so you can't talk with me, but chat with me, but I'm not going to do that with a seller. He's going to be there. So it virtually gives me a script and makes sure I talk, particularly if I'm using a platform that isn't all that familiar to me. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. And here's where I want to spend my last few minutes, is really making sure you have that really thorough aspect of content, because the property condition, the property, the property's attributes, all of those things and serve as how they will appeal to that pool of buyers. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking to identify that pool of buyers and what value they're going to place on it. These things are vitally important. And again, in this crazy, busy, superheated marketplace, some of you have gotten a little lax on some of these things. And frankly, if you get caught being a little lax and you make a mistake, it's not always viewed as a mistake by Judge Judy. We've had some significant lawsuits over not having accurate information, and especially when someone like myself gets up as an expert witness and said, the standard of care, the standard of practice would be that you would have had this content or material or data. So number one is a complete property description, and that most likely is going to come from public information. All right. So field card, property, public data in the multiple listing service, what is the most accurate public information that is on the property? How big is the lot according to the town? What are the buildings on the town? You know, how many rooms, bedrooms, etc. is there? You know, are there mystery outbuildings that weren't there? Are there additions on that don't have permits? Does it say I only have 2 bathrooms when I have 3? Are those going to be permit issues or etc.? What are the public information that I have on the property? What is contained in the deed? And again, never anyone have I ever recommended that anybody be listing a property without a deed. Now I think it's going to be significantly important because the owner's name, the address, the legal description of the property again is going to be significant. And again, you know that we have had dozens of lawsuits over the square footage of a house or a property line. So are all those things lined up? Have I stated them as they are stated in public record? Is a seller understanding exactly what they are transferring and understanding so they're not misrepresenting it or they're not placing value where it may not necessarily be? The amount of annual taxes, again, depends upon a lot of that information. Do those things coordinate with the town field records or the taxes that go through that aspect? So annual taxes should have been on this slide. Pending assessments, again, including any special assessments, is does the town have in their plans to hook up to sewer or do some of those other aspects, and will that work continue or is it going to be on hold? So it's kind of like the hammer hanging over the head from that. And again, building and land values, what's the total assessed value? Year of construction, again, is significant in value. And I always put that in here, everyone, because the house I'm standing in here right now was built in from what I have understood from experts, is most likely in the 1930s. But my field card says my house was built in the 1950s. And it actually was built as a 1-room house. There's actually 3 houses on my street that most likely started as the identical house. You can see the similarities, although there's been changes over the years. And it was a poured foundation, which would have been just at the beginning of the 30s. So it's quite possible that people think that's unusual because it would be more likely to see fieldstone up until that point here in Massachusetts. Most likely the 1950s date comes from when, and I am not kidding, remember I lived down on the Cape, everyone, when indoor plumbing was added to my house, because actually there's a remnant of the indoor cistern that's still in here. My house was most likely really almost like a 1-room house with a floor heating system that came into place, and there was an addition. My bathroom is clearly an addition, everyone, and I have some closure into a front rooms as well that were here. And so the effective year built is actually, I think, how it's worded on a lot of year lots. Most likely is when there was a permit required to be pulled for work, and the town of Barnstable was just creating their data. So that makes a big difference because some of the structure would be really hard to explain to the 1950s. For example, the indoor cistern, which completely fooled my home inspector, right? So understanding what some of that historical aspect is or that effective year built could be important to the pricing or the knowing of property from that. It's why, you know, one of the downsides I have always seen over the years of how when we went to buyer agency and seller agency was the lack of the ability of our group, our team, or our office to really help in the pricing of property. You know, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. There's some of you oldies but goodies on today's call as well who remember the days when we used to stroll the office through as we listed a property and have them give their opinion and price. Obviously, agency changed that as well. But you know what? Mentors, coaches, other team members, if this stuff is all new to you, is really helpful for you, particularly the not only more knowledgeable they are about the structure of housing, but the more knowledgeable they might be about the area or marketplace. I actually found out a lot about my house from a local realtor who I'd known for years who specialized in this marketplace, who gave me some lowdown. And then I actually, the listing agent's father, who was also at one point in real estate, actually lives down the street. And so we've chatted over the years, and they've filled me in on a lot of the information as well. So understanding property and that can affect the pricing of property and how big it is, what's the square footage, et cetera, from that property. Next up is mortgage information. And let me share with you, everyone, if our market truly changes, this one's going to be significant, that you start obtaining mortgage information. And I'm going to say to you that if you have been in the business for the last 5 years and actively listing property, you have probably for 5 years never asked a seller about their mortgage information. And by that, I mean, for example, what type of mortgage they have, what their current payment status is, what's their payoff amount. Why? Right? Anybody who sold was going to sell it for more than they purchased for, so that was going to cover their mortgage, and there was absolutely no need to invade their privacy, ask them that confidential information. Well, guys, you're about to be their agent, their fiduciary, the person who's supposed to keep that confidential information, and this may be critical, all right, critical. You all have heard the reach out of companies who have said, you know, we'll put your payments on suspension, we'll add them on to the back end. That's going to be important for you to know if you're going to sell it. You know that applied to people who are servicing, who are not servicing, but actually holding the mortgage. So there's that difference between who holds your mortgage and who's servicing it, right? Are they current? Are they suspended, or are they in arrears of that? And what obviously is their payout? Are you going to end up in a short sale? I don't think we have a lot of prepayment penalties anymore because they don't qualify under the qualifying residential mortgages CRMs QRMs, very often anymore. But it is possible, everyone, that you might be asked to sell a property of someone who bought within the last 5 years. You do want to check because there is some prepayment penalties that were allowed under special programs, and that prepayment penalty may affect how you go into a short sale. So doing a review of their mortgage is really important. By the way, you know, I know the rates are really low, but if they change at all, everyone, knowing assumptions or what the fees and requirements are could be significant for you. So understanding that information is important to you. We talked about most of these things, and you see some of the graphing that we looked at. I'm sorry, I'm gonna, as I said, I knew I was gonna probably slide through. What's the buyer pool looking for? I keep using that phrase. It's the most important thing I think that you're gonna look at to help a seller price his property is, Mr. Seller, how many buyers are out there? That would be in that inventory rate, everyone's statistic. What are they looking for? What is the condition of the property, right? And just an FYI, everyone, watch that. I'm predicting that trend may change from the perfect trendy color open concept plan, you know, the millennials who didn't want to do anything to the property, to it being really appealing to attract to flippers or investors or that aspect. So keep that in mind. That the condition of the property may change if the platform of the buyer pool change. What are they looking for? Size and location. That comes back to, as we were talking before, Steve's luxury multi-million-dollar house in Sherborne, and how many bedrooms, how much size, what's the lot size, etc., as compared to someone looking for a condo in downtown Boston, or etc. So those things are drastically going to change. What's your buyer pool looking for? It's the ultimate cost of value, and it is the ultimate thing that your competition, right, tells you in the market pool. Here's who you're competing with is significantly important from that. And then again, that inventory rate is really our supply and demand number that we're looking for. So those are a couple of things, and I think these are not new concepts, everyone. These are concepts that have always been out there, but I think we need to sharpen our axe, as they say, to really get really good at this, and this will make all the difference. If I were going to look to do anything while I was quarantined, it would be researching, knowing my tools for market analysis, watching the numbers of the price range, and helping myself get better at pricing property. I hope that you got some real value out of today's webinar, everyone, and I really thank you for joining. As I always say, and I'll put it up here, everyone, so you can kind of see that. I know I skipped a few slides in the back, but here's my contact information. Please, please shoot me an email, send me a message. Look forward to connecting with everyone on future programs, and I'll see you next Tuesday, everyone, in our program. Thanks for joining me.